Folks, it's the January 2022 Costa Rica Roundup here on our weekly Wednesday night Costa Rica chat with Costa Rica Matt. Our viewers have been patiently submitting critical questions all month long. Throughout January, we've had 3 episodes of our Wednesday night Costa Rica chat. And tonight, we're going to go back over some of the questions submitted by viewers in the month of January to make sure that we're not leaving anyone's wonderful question in the dust. My name is Matt Rosenstiel. I'm the owner-broker of Latitude 10 Realty here in Playa Junquial, Guanacaste, Costa Rica. Tonight is the first month of what I hope will be a routine where on the last Wednesday of every month, we're going to be covering questions that have been submitted by our viewers throughout the month, as long as they're appropriate for our audience here. If you're tuning in line, thank you. Tuning in live, thank you very much. You're welcome to submit your questions now. 100% will be certain to get those compiled and going for late February. If you're watching this as a replay, don't hesitate to put your question in the comments, whether it's about moving to Costa Rica real estate, Costa Rica expat life, or anything you'd like to know about Costa Rica, Matt. We'll be happy to pick the best questions every month and go back over those. Tonight, January 26th, 2022, we'll first start with a brief Costa Rica news wrap-up for the month. I want to give a few updates to people about some topics you're probably wondering about, where they stand, and how things are moving. The U.S. just issued an interesting travel advisory related to Costa Rica, and lots of people are still asking about the QR code and what it's like to live in Costa Rica at this time. We're going to start a new segment tonight where, just like in real life, where I hand off tasks that I don't necessarily want to tackle to my assistant, Danielle Rodriguez, we're going to invite him onto the show for just a brief chat so that we can talk a little bit about COVID and the QR code and what he's seeing, hey, Danielle, in the Central Valley versus what we're seeing here in Guanacaste. After that, we're going to be going over, to start out, 6 questions that we've got over the last month. We'll cover topics about whether or not beaches have lifeguards here, the frequency of shark and wildlife attacks, homeowners and car insurance and their costs, whether or not you can purchase property from Costa Rica residents, AirBNB, and finally, we'll talk about Costa Rica's culture and a question about how people feel given that foreigners here can oftentimes have a ton of money. Thanks very much for tuning in to our live Costa Rica chat. I'm Costa Rica Matt. Stay tuned. It sounds like the audio may have snapped off there. I'm not sure whether or not I came back in on time. Thanks very much for joining us tonight for our January 22 Costa Rica Roundup. Our goal tonight is to go back through, first of all, the questions that viewers have submitted over the last month to make sure we're giving the information that people are looking for. And we'll also start out with a brief roundup of the news and some updates as to what we're looking at here in Costa Rica as of January 26th, 2022. Again, my name is Matt Rosenstiel. If you're looking for relevant, straightforward information on Costa Rica and moving here, be sure to give me a subscribe. It will make me feel incrementally more self-important. So let's talk a little bit about Costa Rica and the news as to where we stand in January. Interestingly, just yesterday, or even it might have been today, the US federal government has issued a travel advisory moving Costa Rica to a list of countries that they would advise the US citizenry not to travel to, citing both COVID-19 and insecurity in the country. It's something that you may not watch very often, and frankly, seeing these kinds of alerts feels a little bit like back after 9/11 when the government was constantly adjusting the terror level and we were sort of wondering how travel conditions or things were supposed to adjust in response to a new color. Uh, this travel advisory is something that's happened before. Yes, Omicron is surging in Costa Rica just like it is in the rest of the world. Honestly, I don't know the statistics to say who can justify whether Costa Rica is in worse condition on that front than the United States of America. I did want to directly address the question of insecurity here in the country. And really, as I continue to go on and on about in my vlog, and one of the things I'll be talking about in a new video about going to the beach and being safe there is that Costa Rica, generally speaking, is a very safe country. If you are not directly involved in the sale and trafficking of cocaine, you're already in a great path to not being involved in one of the crimes that the US government might be concerned about. They do see that Central America and Costa Rica have increasing murder rates, or that there's violence related to drug trafficking that happens. A lot of that is happening in the urban areas of the country to which you never even want to go. And again, if you're not part of this section of life, really the number of incidents that we see with tourists involved, really any sorts of crimes that aren't just petty theft, are very rare. And as long as you're sticking to some common sense rules and not ending up super drunk at 3 a.m. at the wrong part of town, as long as you're not flashing cash, as long as you're not showing that you have really amazing possessions that are easy to steal, you're very much not going to have problems here in Costa Rica. The crime we do see, and something we'll be talking about in future videos, is mainly petty theft, people getting stuff stolen from their vehicles, and most often unforced entry, where tourists in condos are getting stuff taken off of terraces or from just inside windows. Let's talk about a big question that I think would be on everybody's mind. Earlier this year, there was widespread panic and the sentiment that the sky was falling when Costa Rica passed a QR code mandate, or a QR code system that very much felt like a mandate to get vaccinated. You were going to have to present your QR code that linked to a health pass where you had uploaded proof of vaccination as of December 1st. If you're a faithful viewer out there, you'll remember that at the time, my first message was, well, anything in Costa Rica never represents a very drastic change and that no one should panic just yet. It turned out that rather than bringing this system fully into force, the government followed up essentially by modifying the system so that if an establishment wants to open at 100% capacity and operate like normal, a restaurant, mall, etc., during this time, they're going to have to enforce the QR code restriction, where when you go into an establishment, you show your phone, they can scan to make sure that you've been vaccinated. And the alternative, if you don't want to enforce the QR code, is that you can operate at 50% capacity and not enforce it if you don't want to. I'm going to ask Danielle Rodriguez, my assistant, to come in to talk a little bit about what's been going on. Because honestly, here in Guanacaste, we go to a couple of family run restaurants. We spend a lot of time out at the beach. We don't go to malls, and we spend as little time in government buildings as possible. So, to be 100% honest, this has not yet dramatically affected our life in our community here living in a small town in Guanacaste. It would be funny if Danielle had missed the cue there to bring himself into the stream, since uh, I'm supposed to be forking responsibility over to him. But anyhow, here in Guanacaste, our 300-person community, there he is. Hopefully everybody can hear him out there. I'm realizing that with my setup, it might be difficult for me to hear you here, Danielle. Tell us a little bit about what it's like in the Central Valley and the restrictions you're seeing and whether or not it's coming into play. Now, Danielle is in the urban, sort of the very populated Central Valley of Costa Rica. Go ahead.
So far, the QR code is mostly on restaurants and social places like bars and disco. A lot of them have been in a rough patch, as for 2020 and 2021. So most of them, if they can open 100%, they will do it. Um, and actually they are closing for the restriction, vehicular restriction on that, so that will depend on that. And the QR code is just voluntarily, like Matt said. And with the restaurants or businesses that has uh 50% capacity to allow people, they have like a sign out. They say we are not requesting QR, or we are requesting QR, so it's 100% capacity. And that is mostly what is happening here. Yeah.
And what do you have any sort of opinion? What percentage of businesses are deciding to operate at full capacity and enforce the QR code restriction? Is it most of them? Is it only a few?
I think it depends on the industry, because like if someone is selling mattresses, they're not that busy, so there doesn't need to have the QR code. But if you're a restaurant, they will obviously, you would appreciate have the 100% capacity. So I would say like 50-50, depending on the industry. Yeah.
Do you still feel that there are, the restrictions here in Guanacaste, the lack of driving at night, some other things that we're supposed to be doing? To be honest, it feels like everyone is very relaxed on those, except for maybe when it comes to masks. Are you seeing real restrictions that you feel are sort of limiting, your way of life there, or is it pretty much business as usual?
um it depends. Police, it's not always, but sometimes they have these um, investigations, you can say. So they just block uh, a street, like a way to the cars drive, and they just see if you are allowed to be on the streets or not.
Yeah.
So it depends on, it's just luck if you get detained. Yeah.
Have you been detained, fined, questioned at all when you were out, or are you following the rules?
I've been asked to put a mask if I am in a bar, for example, or if you're like dancing or talking, standing up. Uh, the the how do you say, the people working on the restaurant or in the place, they would go and say, "Hey, police are coming. Please sit down," and they just do like a quick inspection to see if everyone is following the rules. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Like I said, this might be happening in places like Tamarindo or Potrero. It's definitely not in Junquillal, and that's one of the nice things about living sort of off the beaten path is you're really you don't have too much of that going on, and really the police have bigger fish to fry. I want to thank you very much for joining me tonight, Danielle. Folks, he will be coming in to regularly contribute. We can get him a better computer so he doesn't have quite so much lag. But we'll go ahead and say goodbye to Danielle, and he can actually sign off for the evening as he'll be moving on with his responsibilities. Again, Danielle Rodriguez is my team member. A lot of you out there will correspond with him at one point or another, and now you can put a face with the name, and it's a tired face. So, buenas noches, Danielle, and have a good one.
Good night, Matt.
Let's keep moving on here, having touched on some local news, what's going on in Costa Rica right now, to your viewer questions submitted over the last month. One of the episodes, the videos that I did was about beaches and talking about the various qualities beaches have. And a viewer submitted questions about distinguishing between different beaches, not just based on whether or not you'll get robbed and whether there's white sand or black sand. Specifically, they asked, do some beaches have lifeguards? And they also wanted to know at different beaches what the frequency of animal attacks, whether it's crocodiles, sharks, stingrays, etc., are. So thank you very much for those questions. And I want to start by saying on the lifeguard question, it's by far the exception to the rule to find a beach with lifeguards in Costa Rica, and they're only at the main tourism hubs. Like I mentioned, I'm going to do an upcoming video on staying safe at the beach. And one of the biggest things that I start off emphasizing is the fact that you need to get local intelligence on which beaches are safe to swim at and at what tides. You're going to find out 9 times out of 10 if you don't want to go to one of those huge tourism beaches, there are no lifeguards. Tamarindo has lifeguards on duty. Jaco, those sorts of places. You'd also find that at really nice resorts where the beach is swimmable as well, they might provide a lifeguard, but that along 99.99% of the Costa Rica coastline, you would not have any kind of lifeguard looking out for you. Having said that, I want to give a shout out to Christian up at Lola's in Avellanas. You do find communities like Christian's where they've got trained volunteer lifeguards. He recently pulled 4 people out of the water in Avellanas. This is a person who's pulled many people out because there's a restaurant there. And you might find those sorts of lifeguards scattered along the coast, these heroes like Christian. But again, it's the exception to the rule, and most often you won't have lifeguards at a beach. Another thing that you won't have very often are wildlife attacks. It doesn't matter what beach we're talking about in the Pacific or Caribbean coast. There's one key element I want to mention to avoid wildlife attacks in the slight frequency or the once in a million circumstance that they do happen. And that, first of all, is avoiding river mouths. Every part of Costa Rica, you've got beaches and a mangrove estuary at the end of it. That's an absolutely beautiful river mouth where from up in the mountains, water is coming down out to the coast and emptying into the beach. It sounds crazy. Some people don't realize, but that river mouth is very much not only the pathway for crocodiles to come and go from the ocean as they migrate to mate, as they go hunting, etc. It's also sort of a pathway for large sharks. It's also a pathway for virtually every food source that those two things are following after. So, first of all, it's only once in a million, or very rarely, that you hear about animal attacks at any Costa Rica beach. The most common thing is going to be either jellyfish or stingray incidents. And we're lucky enough here that our jellyfish aren't the kind that are going to really kill you. And, obviously stingrays, they're painful, but something that can be treated. Obviously, you can prevent or avoid stingray incidents by shuffling along the bottom of the ocean. Jellyfish, really, you have to rely on people telling you when they're in the water. But to avoid any risk of those bigger animal attacks, and being that 1 in a million person who falls victim in Costa Rica, stay away from river mouths, these mangrove estuaries, especially at night. I mean, that seems very logical, but keep to beaches where all of these animals coming in and out of the river mouth are as far away as possible. So your best swimming areas can be somewhat between those and close to the beach, where these animals, in their infrequent passage along the coast, will be less likely to be seen. Once again, I've lived here 14 years, and we've had, in that time, there was one incident up at Avellanas where somebody got bit by a shark and did survive, and another incident with a crocodile biting a guy in Tamarindo, a surfer, also an incident where the person survived. And that's 14 years, millions and millions of people swimming in the ocean here up and down the coast. In that time, you've had far more issues, with the stingrays, little stuff like that happening. Moving on, we're just checking them off the list here. Your viewer questions from January 2022. We had a great question that was, how does homeowners and car insurance work? This is a simple one to answer here in Costa Rica, because both your homeowners and car insurance are provided by the same semi-government ministry, which is called INS, or INS. I'm sure that there are private homeowners policies available and supplemental private insurers available, but by far, for homeowners insurance, INS is handling the absolute vast majority of policies in the country, and they're the sole provider, the national provider of car insurance, which is definitely different than people from the US and Canada are accustomed to. Here, your car insurance, which again is controlled by INS or INS, is determined by your car's year, the model, and very little else. In fact, it's just a government table where every year you go into the bank to pay for your car insurance. You pull up your license plate numbers in the system. They tell you how much you owe, and your amount is entirely based on that government table rather than how good a driver you are. Just to give you a few ideas, first of all, let's talk about those prices for car insurance. We can give 3 examples of cars from 2022. The newer models are always more expensive to insure through this program because their value is higher, etc. A 2019 vehicle this past year cost 400,000 colones for the car insurance. That would probably be about $725. Again, that was a 2019. A 2008 vehicle, a larger Fortuner, cost 240,000 colones, or about $400. And finally, a 2000 vehicle, a Toyota, was down around 129,000 colones, or probably $220 for the full year of insurance. So again, a fairly new car, we paid $725. A car that's 13 years old, we paid $400. And a car that's 22 years old, we paid only about $200 to insure. And this is through INS, the sole provider of national car insurance. It's one of the stickers that you have to have on your vehicle to be able to drive around. And in addition to the technical inspection, it's one of the things that if you get pulled over by the traffic cops, mainly one of the things that they're going to be looking for and try to use to give you a ticket if you don't have your marchamo paid. That's through INS or INS, which does have offices in most of the medium-sized cities in Costa Rica. To go back to homeowners insurance here, first of all, an interesting thing to note is that a lot of foreigners, a higher percentage of people who own property in Guanacaste than I believe in the US, for example, have homeowners insurance. Fewer people have it here because generally speaking, your home is made out of reinforced concrete from the foundation all the way up through the walls to the ceiling. And then you've got a simple metal roof. And generally speaking, all homes here are built to live up to earthquake standards. Now, there are a lot of people using other systems of construction that might be a little bit more vulnerable to things like an appliance fire or, any kind of catastrophic thing for which you might need insurance. But again, a ton of foreigners here have their concrete homes and they look at the premiums every year in order to be able to insure their home. They do a value assessment and really they feel confident that their property is not going to be utterly destroyed. They might get insurance definitely for scenarios of total destruction. And you do see people insure the contents of their home. But as a general rule of thumb, fewer people here have it than you might expect. And the rate for homeowners insurance is 0.21% of the value that you're insuring. Again, that's just below 0.25% or 0.21% of the insured value that you're going after. Now, in my experience, you'll see that what INS is willing to insure your home for is probably a lot less than what you would pay for it in the real estate market. They've got a table that they use to define values as to what it would cost to build the home. They look at the type of construction, the size, they put in a few other variables, and they come up with a number, again, that could be well below what you're going to pay for a home or what it actually costs to build it when you've hired a contractor and gone all the way through the process. But it's their table and it's what they're going to offer you. And your premium, at 0.21% of the value you're insuring is a pretty reasonable cost to be sure 100% that you've got your investment secured here in Costa Rica. Next, we had a question as to whether you can purchase property from Costa Rican residents, meaning people who are born and raised here in the country. And the answer is absolutely yes. We'll assume that the question was directed towards foreigners trying to buy from Costa Rican residents, Costa Rican citizens, and the answer is yes, foreigners can. The only exception to foreigners being able to own property is that beachfront concession land, which is the leased areas right up to the ocean where the municipality can give leases to people on 20 or 30-year time frames. That concession property right on the ocean should be owned by a Costa Rican entity or individual. And so you do have to create a legal workaround in order, if you're a foreigner, to purchase a concession and hold it. But for the rest of the property in Costa Rica, it doesn't matter whether you're buying it from a foreigner or from a Costa Rican. Foreigners can own property here in the country without being residents, whether they're purchasing it from another foreigner or from a Costa Rican. You will often find that most of the inventory in our beach communities, a lot of the places that have already developed, Most of the existing inventory is going to be owned by foreigners as well. There would be fewer pieces of real estate inventory owned still by Costa Ricans in places like Tamarindo, Playa Grande, Playa Potrero, Flamingo, on and on. But again, you can purchase it as a foreigner, whether you're buying from a Costa Rican or from a foreigner. Let's move on here. Another person had asked, is it easy to Airbnb a Costa Rica property I've purchased? And this is where I always avoid giving definite answers, and I stick to relativism when I can. This is a question on which I want to punt, because easy is a very relative term. And in essence, yes, the Costa Rica government makes it so that you as a foreigner can purchase property here in Costa Rica and earn money through Airbnb. No problem. It's 100% legal, and you'll be able to find a local property manager who will do it for you and manage your rentals so that you don't have to put in energy. No problem. Yes, it is overall very easy to Airbnb your property in that sense. Another interesting point that I'd love to mention is that Costa Rica's liability principle in court is way different than the US or Canada. So if you're an Airbnb host from California or the East Coast of the US, where you're constantly worried about every possible bad scenario that could happen to an Airbnb guest, that principle is non-existent here in Costa Rica, in the sense that somebody staying in your property cannot come and sue you unless it appears that you've done something deliberately that resulted in their injury. Like if you left knives sticking out of the ceiling and put a trampoline underneath it, yes, there's some liability here in Costa Rica. If you don't have a fence around your pool here, somebody trips and falls into it and ruins their cell phone, they can't sue you for their cell phone because you didn't have a fence. So that's one of the things that makes it much easier to Airbnb here in Costa Rica. What I'll say is not necessarily that easy is the financial oversight, the taxes, and managing the administrative side with your property manager. Costa Rica is not a paradise for money laundering or for anybody looking for a tax haven. And as the government has gone trying to balance their budget over the years, very much they've looked to Airbnb properties and foreigners as a source of part of their tax revenue. And who can blame them, because there are thousands of foreigners who've been renting properties here for years who frankly aren't paying a cent in taxes. So there's this obvious pool of resources that the government has gravitated towards. Excuse me. Forgot my cup of carrot juice tonight. There's this pool of resources the government has gravitated towards. Taxes for Airbnb properties can be something that eliminates your profit margin. They can make it difficult to, take your minimum rentals, pay all of your bills, and still end up with a little bit of profit at the end of the year. And it's very important to find a property manager who is absolutely in tune with current tax laws, because there are a lot of property managers who are not, and they could be exposing you to liability with time by not paying the correct taxes and by helping you sort of avoid the true tax picture here in the country. So when you go looking for your vacation rental manager, be sure to grill your potential property manager about your taxes and how they're going to help you stay compliant with Costa Rica law. If your property manager is not going to do it, your lawyer should be. And very much I encourage everybody to be especially on top of taxes, just because the Costa Rica government is going to be looking for opportunities to audit people. They want to be able to find a foreigner here and there to make a story out of. You will see people with consequences for completely avoiding their taxes from Airbnb. It's not going to be tons of audits, and they're not going to come down on everybody, but don't be caught in those shoes and really regretting that you didn't just pay all of your Airbnb taxes over the years. Let's move on to another question that I really liked. This was contributed by Ian and Amanda. Thank you very much. Some foreigners have lots of money compared to locals in some cases. How is resentment in that regard? Really sort of a cultural question here, and one that I love to talk about because, yes, you would be blind not to realize that there's a huge disparity between some of the foreigners who live here and some of the local families who are struggling to make a living. There's a huge disparity between most of the tourists who come to the high-end resorts and a lot of the people working there. And one wants to know if this is a country where there's resentment and anger over that. And this is an area in which Costa Rica is utterly special. First of all, it's important to understand that the stability here that Costa Rica has had and the lack of foreign intervention has given people a much, part of the reason you find Costa Rican culture to be more relaxed, laid back, and joyful in general is very much that stability and, to be honest, that lack of foreign intervention. You might find that in some countries where that resentment is at its peak are definitely countries with a history of colonialism, neo-colonialism, post-colonialism, whatever it's called, of foreign powers coming in, messing with the government, changing it out, imposing their system in a foreign place. Costa Rica has stayed out of the way of history, generally speaking. It's always been sort of a country that the United States of America really liked because they sort of rejected communism early on in the sort of beginnings of the Cold War. And as a result, as a basic history lesson, Costa Ricans don't have that, long history, decades of that sort of activity, the intervention, to lay a foundation for any kind of resentment. I also think that it's one of the places on earth where people really don't feel resentment to material wealth because you don't see desperate hunger or poverty to the degree that you see it in other places. And so, yeah, the guy on a really junky motorcycle sees the person in a Lexus SUV and he thinks, man, I'd really like to have that. But chances are, he might have a full stomach. He's headed home to his family. He might have a very simple job, but one that's helping him, put food on the table. And because most Costa Ricans are enjoying food, shelter, and a standard of living that's definitely lower lower class rather than in the stages of poverty, you see that people all around are less angry or definitely not quick to be angry about that disparity in material wealth. This is also a case-by-case basis, and I had an episode recently of talking about Costa Rica culture. And when I say case-by-case basis, I want to say that, yeah, there's plenty of resentment when there are very rich people who act like very big jerks to Costa Ricans who are really just trying their best to get along. And that's where, that's obviously preventable resentment. One of the things that I didn't discuss in my video that I'd love to emphasize here is the fact that if you're somebody that enjoys or, is enjoying the fruits of this disparity, you definitely should not be someone who's ever negotiating wages with people, who's trying to get their final wage bill reduced at the end of the year because they missed a day or two here and there. You shouldn't try and replace their cash wages with a little gift you gave them or something extra you threw in as a benefit. You should be bending over backwards to give people jobs with steady salaries that involve fair pay. The fair pay, as defined by the Costa Rican government, is a minimum wage table that honestly is an embarrassment for some of the lower end of the table. People making between $3 an hour and even a little bit lower for some of the professions that they list. Be sure to pay what you consider to be a living wage given the circumstances, and never hesitate to be generous with people. And I bet it will be very unlikely that you'll see even the slightest sign of this resentment that some people can worry about that you do see in other countries. Since this is our January roundup, I want to touch on a couple questions we've got in the chat here. First of all, is there a video that covers the current or final version of the law to encourage expats to move to Costa Rica? You're absolutely right. The law's been published, it's implemented, and I have been 100% remiss in not publishing an update on that. I'll be more than happy to do some quick research and talk about it soon here in our videos, because definitely a lot of people want to know, and my only understanding on that law is that, yes, you can now take advantage of it, but because it was implemented so recently that it still can be complicated in terms of getting the right the right bureaucrats to figure out the paperwork. But really, I haven't heard much about it recently. Bryn asked, are there different levels of insurance like collision, full coverage, etc.? Absolutely. Those numbers that I mentioned were the minimum coverage that the country forces you to purchase. You can add third-party liability, all kinds of other coverage to your auto insurance. And in fact, one of the cool things that you can do is insure your car with any driver behind the wheel who's driving legally. That's not too big of a cost, and it's one of the ways that's enabled us to rent a car here and have insurance for it despite a third party driving it. So definitely there are different levels of that. Anyhow, I want to let you know, folks, that as we move into 2022, we'll be live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you want to get in your questions to be on February's roundup of questions, you can put them in the comments of any video that we have out there, and we'll be sure to include them. Thank you very much for watching this evening. I'm Costa Rica Matt. If you're so inclined, do click subscribe. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time.